And the first step of the project is to come up with the what, with the reforms that we wish to recommend, with a package of reforms, not just one, but this is a package of reforms that would really address the problem. And that package starts off with short-term, comparatively easy wins, which are implementable and build some momentum, and includes also longer term, an actual empowered, accountable environmental government agency at the global level. So we have this package of reforms, and then once that's in place, we grow the smart coalition to get this onto the agenda of the General Assembly and to start to get action on. So at a very high level, that is the problem we're seeking to address and how we intend to address it. In terms of previous attempts to do it, like the Global Pact for the Environment, which Macron in France was pushing at one point, yeah, we're just building on it, and we're going to be working with the same people. This is not something entirely novel and original. It's just building on the shoulders of giants that have gone before us. We're just continuing the same work. And when, you know, the Global Pact for the Environment didn't achieve what it wanted to achieve, well, it's like Edison trying to build a light bulb. He famously said that he hadn't failed. He had 10,000 attempts where he built a light bulb that worked. And he said all of those attempts, they weren't failures. They were just demonstrations of ways that didn't work. So with that sort of constructive attitude that we learn as we go and building on those who've gone before, that's how we're approaching this. So that, in very broad outline, is the project plan. In terms of where we are now, at our last meeting, which was on the 30th of January, this is amongst a core group of civil society organizations who are working in the field of environmental. At that last meeting, we agreed a draft vision, mission, values, and principles. It's kind of the core that we're going to build our coalition around. So I will briefly, I'm not going to read them all out, but I will briefly tell you what's in the content now. So, the project, mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance. Vision. Well, our vision is a just world where all of humanity and nature flourish in harmony. So that's fairly straightforward, hopefully a simple, inspiring vision, not something for people to disagree with. An important word there is just. There's some feedback from someone. I don't know if you can all mute your microphones, please. So if we're going to get effective and accountable governance in place, it's going to have to be just. And that's obviously a massive challenge, and it cannot be separated out. So our vision is a just world where all of humanity and nature flourish in harmony. That's where we're trying to get to. Our mission, and the mission is what it is you're going to do to achieve your vision. Our mission is to create effective, equitable, and accountable global governance of the Earth system, serving the common good of humanity. So some of the words there, effective and accountable, yes, obviously has to be. It needs to be accountable. If it's to be effective, it has to be empowered. And if it's going to be empowered, it needs to be held accountable. Equitable is a key word there, tying in with justice in the vision. The Earth system is the whole interacting environmental system. It's a sciencey term, which you can Google. And then serving the common good of humanity, drawing the contrast with where we are today, where global governance does not serve the common good of humanity. It serves the winners of the Second World War by failing to hold them to account, as we see with Russia today. So that's our vision and mission, our values, and I won't go through these in details, and they're pretty bland, but important to working together. Integrity, justice, inclusion, working together, and focus. And then we've agreed a bunch of principles in two groups. The first set of principles is how we're going to go about implementing reform rather than the what of reform. So the how is agreeing core principles, being firm on those principles, but flexible on implementation. Primary goal is the long-term empowered global governance, but we have short-term steps to build momentum towards that goal. And essentially all the various members of the coalition may be pushing their own short-term steps, and we all agree on the big long-term goal. and how we prioritize the short term versus the long term. Again, it's pragmatic, it's flexible. We need to broaden our coalition so it's as representative as possible, and that's critical. And this meeting is a good part of that, with a AU-EU working group here. This cannot be, here am I, a middle-aged European male, white. This cannot be an imposition from the outside. We need to develop this together. And so working with the Global South and civil society in the Global South is critical at this stage of the process. And then we need to work with states as well. And we're open to starting with a coalition of the willing. So that's just a pragmatic question of how this moves forward. In terms of the what, well, essentially it's our mission. We need to create effective, equitable and accountable global governance of the Earth system. Our focus is on creating the institutions. So we're not fundamentally about policy, we're fundamentally about decision-making and institutions. What else should I tell you from here? Governance functions, we've listed them: deliberative, legislative, executive, judicial, and learning. So essentially, a lot of that's parliamentary functions. You cannot really have accountable governance without some kind of parliamentary body. And then there's the observation that if you're looking at governance of the environment, it inevitably has implications for justice, the economy, finance, trade, technology. So the governance system one puts in place needs to be broad enough to cope with all of that. And the objective here is not to create some one world government mega institution that controls everything, but to put in place an orchestrating function at the top level. Again, something that a parliament would do. And then final point I'll make from the reforms, the structure of the reforms we want to see, is this principle of subsidiarity, that you have governance at every level from global to local, and you deal with problems as locally as they can be dealt with. It came out of the Catholic Church, it's prominent in European governance. So subsidiarity is a very important principle to stop getting overmighty central government. So that is where we are today. I will very quickly talk about next steps. So our next meeting. Yep, sorry. Let's have a look. Is someone trying to say something? All right, I'll quickly give next steps, and then hopefully we can move on to a more general conversation, or Guido can talk to us about the Global Green New Deal. So next steps are, we have a meeting mid-March, 13th of March, where Maya Groff, who is my partner in crime on this, she is getting towards the end of writing a huge climate governance report. And it's not just climate governance, it's broader than that now. And a lot of the reforms, the specific reforms I'm talking about, they're all drawn from that report. Essentially, she's going to produce this massive report, which has some very senior commissioners. So people like Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who's ex-president of the General Assembly, Mary Robinson, who's chair of the Elders, Johan Rockström, who's the scientist, author of Planetary Boundaries. So there are some very serious commissioners of her report, and that's going to be her starting point. So she has a meeting with her commissioners coming up, and she'll be reporting back on how that meeting went. So that's our next meeting. And we're starting to build out the coalition, which is on my to-do list, and as ever, I'm a bit behind. But I need to reach out to civil society. So if we have civil society representatives on this call who would like to be part of this process, I'll just stick my email in the chat, and with that, I will stop talking. Do we have Kennedy on the call?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for that fine address. Can I also attach the documents that you send me?
Yes, you most certainly can. Yes, those are public documents.
Oh, fine. I'll do that as soon as possible.
Fairly public. I'm not sure if I want them actually published, but yeah, that's fine. You can attach those documents, or you can just forward my email.
Perfect. So thank you so much for that fine address. I would like to invite our next speaker. His name is Guido Montani. He's a professor by profession. He is a professor of international political economy at the University of Pavia, Italy. He has published several books and several papers. And the most interesting I've read so far is an article he wrote for Social Europe. And the first statement is COP-27 in Sharm el-Sheikh is now open, but the European Union does not seem to have the will to achieve serious goals. I would like to invite Mr. Guido Montani to address us today and to also share a bit on his plans to implement Global Green Deal. Welcome.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this important meeting. And I have to talk about the European Union and African Union relationship and what is their contribution for a global Green Deal, that is the environment problem, which is a challenge for the future of humanity. Before talking about the environmental crisis, I need to make an introduction about the stages, 3 stages of European Union and African Union relationship, because I think that this point is important. Usually people talk about, do you hear me or not? Yes, do you hear me? No, because because usually, of course, when you talk about the European-Africa relationship, everyone talk about colonialism, anti-colonialism, fight for freedom, and so on. But I like to show you that the first stage is a
Guido, you're on mute. Guido, you're on mute.
Yes, somebody. Sorry, I am not able to maintain open the microphone.
I hear you now.
Now, yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So there is the first stage is a cultural problem, because after the Second World War, there was a very interesting debate concerning the creation of African unity, African Union. And in this, you know that the Organization for African Unity was made in 1963. But before, there was a very good debate among federalist proposal for African unity. The main, let me call them founding father, are Leopold Sédar Senghor, Kwame Nkrumah, and Julius Nyerere. Nkrumah wrote a book published in the same year of the creation of the Organization of African Unity, which is called, the title is Africa Must Unite, and I assure you that it is a full federalist proposal. on the model of the United States Federation. And Julius Nyerere also wrote a very many intervention on this point, and you can find in the collection of his speech, Freedom and Unity, published in 1966. But I think that the most interesting intervention was the intervention of Sedar Senghor, at the European Convention or European Constitutional Convention held in 1953, when there was in discussion the creation of a European defense community. The proposal of Senghor was that the European Parliament, which was discussed, should have some member of the African representative. And the proposal was approved by the Assembly. And so that's the proposal of Senghor was to have a Euro-African unity. As you know, the European Defense Community was not approved by France, and so we don't have this kind of parliament. But the proposal was very interesting, and I think that the Federalists should think about that. The second stage, so after the creation of the Organization of African Unity, is the Lomé Convention. The Lomé Convention started in 1975 until the year 2000, and it was an economic organization and a political organization. From the economic point of view, it is interesting to see that in the Lomé Convention, there was a fund, a common fund financed by the European Union for the stabilization of agricultural product, which was a very big problem for the exportation of African countries, which is called, the fund was called STABEX. And there was also a second fund called SISMIN for the stabilization of the price of minerals. So this shows you that in a certain sense, the European Union was stabilizing the economy of the African Union, African cooperation. The second point is that show that there was also a political supranational cooperation among Africa and the European Union, because there was annual meeting, much more than annual sometimes, among the European Parliament and the representative of Parliament of the African people. And there was also a council of head of state and government. So you see that there was an economic cooperation, but also a supranational cooperation on an equal foot. That is very important, because when you talk about rich and poor countries, the emerging countries and industrialized countries, usually you talk about a difference. But in such a case, there was the attempt to cooperate on an equal foot. The first phase is what we have today. In 2000 was created the African Union. And the model, the reason from the transition from the Lomé Convention to the African Union, I don't talk about because I needed too much time. But the model of the African Union today is the European Union. You have an assembly of head of states. You have the Council of Ministers. You have a Pan-African Parliament, you have a Commission, and you have a Court of Justice in Africa. So you see that the model, the institutional model of the African Union is exactly similar to the model of the European Union. And the last meeting was the meeting between the between the African Commission and the European Commission, and there was a very full support from the European member for the African Continental Free Trade Area, which we know is a very important project for creating a common market in Africa. So I stop here about the history because I don't want to take too much time about the history. And now I like to talk about the real problem of the environmental crisis and the need to face the Anthropocene challenge, which is a challenge not only for African people, but for humanity. Concerning the environmental problem in Africa, there is some people saying that Africa can, in a certain sense, make a leapfrog to avoid the industrial problem faced by industrial countries with fossil fuels. That is, it is possible for Africa to make a development, environmental development, only based only on clean energies, so solar and wind. That is a thesis, interesting. Probably it is, in some sense, it is possible, but practically today is not possible. Why? According to me, it is not possible because today you have a kind of economic relationship between the global economy and the African economy, in which the rich country invest mainly in Africa fossil fuels. So to create carbon fuels or oil, mainly the trade in oil fuels. So in Africa, since the investment of African countries is not enough in clean energies, the result is that Africa cannot really utilize clean energy. Thinks about the difficulty of network in electricity. For instance, in Central Africa, the network for energy are very difficult to utilize. So many industry, many business are obliged to utilize generators with oils. So there is a problem. Africa is home to 18% of humanity, but Africa receives less than 5% of global energy investments. So you see that there is an economic problem which translates in the difficult for Africa to make the leapfrog towards clean energies. And also many countries in Africa today are building fossil fuel power plants. But that is, according to me, the main economic problem, because it is a dysfunction in the functioning of the world economy. The second is a political problem. A political problem is that during the Lomé Convention, it was mainly Europe to have a relationship with the African countries. Now you have the situation is rapidly changing in the new world political system today with Greek powers. You know the problem of security, the case of expulsion of France from Mali, and also the big problem is the coming in Africa of China government and China investment. Let me say, let me number a certain number of countries in Africa having a relationship, the Belt and Road Initiative, you know the Belt and Road Initiative launched by China government. That involve a relationship with Kenya, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Egypt, Zambia, Ghana, Suez Canal. There is a very important center in Chinese center in Suez Canal and South Africa and so on. So you see that Europe was the main. Today, Europe is also the main important let me say, developed country importing goods from Africa. But China and Russia are becoming member of many countries, have many new relationship with African countries. So that brings me to my last proposal, which is the relationship with African environmental policy and global policy. My proposal is that a global Green Deal is necessary, a global Green Deal, not only a continental approach. I don't have a continental approach because the problem is global and we need a global public good. The global public good should, in terms of investment, become a global Green Deal. The Global Green Deal is a complex proposal, but here I limit myself to a very simple observation, observation and proposal made by a very important economist, Raghuram Rajan, who was the president of the Bank of India, the Central Bank of India. In a paper published last year, Rajan proposed this, according to me, very clever mechanism. The observation is that the per capita emission of carbon dioxide is different. For instance, in the US, you have 16 tons per capita. In Uganda, you have 0.1 ton per capita. So there is a very big gap between the per capita emission, ton emission of carbon in Uganda and in the United States. So that is the problem of loss and damage. Discuss Sharm el-Sheikh. And Sharm el-Sheikh, the main proposal was coming from emerging countries asking for loss and damage, and in a certain sense, the refusal of industrialized country to pay 100 billion, but we need much more. The proposal of Rajan is this one. Every country that emits more than the global average of around 5 tons per capita would pay annually into a global incentive fund. So it should have to contribute positively to the global incentive funds. The measure of this contribution is called by Rajan global carbon incentive, and Rajan proposed $10 per tons. In such a case, so you have an average, and the people higher on the average pay the people and the countries, and the people under the average receive money. In such a case, the United States should pay 36 billion, and Uganda will receive $2.1 billion. So that is a very simple proposal in order to show that in a global Green Deal, you can approach the environmental problem in a new way and make very effective proposal. Of course, in such a case, if you have a cooperation among the big powers, so United States, China, Russia, India, Brazil, Europe, and so on and so on. So in such environment, political environment, Europe and China, which are the main cooperation country with Africa today, because the United States don't like to talk to have many trade with Africa, can improve their cooperation in order to help the African Union to invest in clean energies, in clean energy plants. So that is easy to see. If you have a very general agreement, nobody can refuse the fact that, for instance, and that is an example, for instance, Europe and China can especially cooperate with the African Union in order to improve clean energy plants. So I stop here. I don't know, excuse me for my English. I know that sometimes you cannot understand well what I say, because unfortunately I am Italian and not an English-speaking people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Guido Montani. And far from it, your English is perfectly audible, and your insights are very valuable. Now I would like to invite our next speaker. He's someone I know. We've worked with him in the World Federalist Movement and in other circles. His name is Juuso Järviniemi. He's a vice president of the Young European Federalists. His priorities are World Federalist Movement, the New Federalist. He's focused on youth, banking union, world federalism, and he's running projects in global solutions for global problems and the Federalist Academy. He's a graduate of the College of Europe, and he lives in Brussels, Belgium. Welcome, Juuso.
Thank you very much for organizing the event, Kennedy, first of all, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today afternoon. I am indeed Juuso Järviniemi. I'm going to speak to you about the Loss and Damage Fund in particular. This builds on what we have heard from the previous speakers, and I would like to bring federalist perspectives, perhaps in line with the Federalist Academy, which is one of the initiatives of the Young European Federalists, as Kennedy was mentioning. Indeed, so in the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, one of the key elements was the Loss and Damage Fund, which was also just mentioned by Guido Montani. The idea here is that it is a fund that helps regions that have been hit by a climate disaster. We all know that these disasters are going to accelerate, become even more frequent, impact more people. We see floods, increase in sea levels, and many other things which can be connected to climate change. So, of course, we need financial reserves in order to provide support for these areas. Now, after the COP-27, the size of this fund is not fully clear yet, but pledges were already made during the conference last autumn. The extent of these pledges at that time was around 230 to 275 million US dollars. But the problem is that, as was already mentioned by Kennedy, estimates for the amount of funding that you need in order to deal with climate change and its negative impacts is much, much higher. Reuters cited sources which estimates that it's around 580 billion US dollars per year by 2030 that will have to be spent on dealing with disasters and their consequences. So the pledges that we have so far, they are simply insufficient for dealing with this. And the problem, of course, is that these catastrophes are recurring and increasingly frequent. Besides the size, there's other issues like the disbursements and the governance mechanism of this fund, which still have to be further defined. And this is actually a process that is currently ongoing. And in COP28 later on this year, we should know more. So this is the right time to make proposals. The key issue here is that the system of pledges by sovereign governments is clearly liable for inefficiencies in raising these funds. We see that this is simply not sufficient at the moment. And I think this is a point that World Federalists should seize on to ensure that climate adaptation and climate response gets the resources that it needs. In my view, I think this is a key issue of global climate action from the viewpoint of federalism, namely the enforceability of commitments. We are relying too much on voluntary commitments, something that is not set in law, really, but which comes from the charity and expediency of the donors. And I think this is an entirely wrong approach. As we very well know as well federalists, the key difference is between domestic and international law is precisely this enforceability of commitments. So if we want to transcend this current system, I think we need to look at ways to actually enforce international law, which very quickly takes us towards ideas on a global federation. But there's the second issue as well, which we see in the Paris Agreement, which is the issue of vagueness in the text of international agreements. Now, in the Paris Agreement, there is an article that specifies that developed countries shall provide financial resources to developing countries on climate adaptation and mitigation. But the Paris Agreement itself does not cite any concrete figures, so that is something to be developed on later. So yeah, I would say that this is a political issue because governments are not prepared to make clear binding commitments on concrete figures to invest on. And this stands in contrast to the European Union, for example, which has a system of own resources. Member states make contributions of their GDP into the European Union budget. They're very, very small contributions. but there is a clear system of how these contributions are calculated, and it's set in law. And that in turn enables the European Union to commit a certain amount of funds to individual programs, for example. And there is, of course, a very different system to what we just described with the COP-27 initiatives. In my opinion, one reason why these commitments are vague, why the language of international treaties is vague in general, is because the system is built on vetoes. These vetoes, making sure that everyone agrees, is something that makes us liable to watered down compromises and to this vague language, which is then going to be filled up on later. And of course, now we are in a climate crisis. It's an emergency, and we cannot afford to water down, to muddle through, as it were. We need concrete action, and we need to accelerate our action. Thirdly, on this point, I will mention the obvious. That of course, these countries, regions that are most vulnerable to climate disasters are also the ones which very often didn't make the biggest contribution to climate change in the first place. So if these funds are insufficient, that is a question of international justice par excellence. It's a quintessential question of international justice. So if we do not have a global federal order that enables us to make these clear binding commitments, then we do not have law that can guarantee international justice in this current world. I'll make a second point as well, which is about non-state actors in climate finance. Climate finance at the global level comes from a mixture of sources, which includes public funds, these pledges made by governments, and private funding as well. And for example, in this loss and damage fund agreed upon in COP27, the need for support from a wide variety of sources, including innovative sources, the text mentions, is specifically recognized. And I think this is an interesting observation for us to make as federalists for a couple of reasons. The first one is because this ties into the classic research problem of international relations, which is the rights of non-state actors in international affairs. Now, federalism, in the traditional sense, one might say Hamiltonian sense, is that federalism is about the organization of powers between different levels of government. And as such, it might appear that federalists have quite little to say about the phenomenon of non-state actors, which do not fall within the definition of governments. But if we take another definition of federalism, the so-called integral federalist approach, which relates to the organization of society as a whole, which observes not only governmental actors, but also others, for example, NGOs, private enterprises, and so on, we get new tools for analyzing this phenomenon of climate finance, which comes from governments and from private parties. And I think this is something that federalists should engage with. It provides for interesting questions, both academically and practically. For example, the issue of what are the respective duties of public actors and private actors in providing this climate finance. I think this is something that's that we should engage with, but I will refrain from making any particular proposals or opinions on this. However, I hope that this encourages you to engage with the idea of integral federalism and see what it can give to you. Now, my last thing before I finish is about solutions. So let me come back to the question of an international climate finance system, which is based on pledges, which I've critiqued. Overcoming this issue, coming up with a system that makes it more structured, more binding, it would be a major shift in international affairs. There's no doubt about that. And for some, it would of course be painful. This is one of the reasons why things don't change, because adjustments bear costs. It is complex. There will be winners and there will be losers. But of course, it is necessary for humanity as a whole. We are all on this planet together. If we do not change this, we will all end up suffering sooner or later. The issue, of course, is that of justice, where some suffer earlier than others. So now this conundrum, it brings to my mind Jean Monnet. I'm a European federalist, and Jean Monnet is one of the founding fathers of the European Union. I'm currently reading his memoirs, where he describes how time and again during his lifetime, there were necessary adjustments that were not being done until the circumstances became such that this necessity became obvious to everyone. So with the climate crisis that has descended upon us, I believe that this moment is approaching us, the one where everyone realizes that this change, which is necessary, even if complex, just has to be done. And what Jean Monnet teaches us is that at that moment, those who want change need to have a proposal that is ready to go, a proposal that can be brought to the table and which will provide an effective solution to this crisis, and which then at the last moments will be adopted. And those who are monitoring European Union politics, how European integration progresses forwards, will know that this has many times in the past decades been the way that the European Union has deepened. So that is a call for action and for reflection by us as federalists. We need to have these proposals that are ready to go, addressing these key challenges that we face with the international system of climate action at the moment, be it finance, be it other collective action problems, which the international system is not able to solve. If we have the solutions at the ready, which I think we do, and we can further develop, we really have the key in our hands for providing a response to this climate crisis. So I will leave you with this hopeful message. Thank you once again, and looking forward to the rest of the speeches.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Juuso. He's a member of the European Federalists. And now I would request if you have any questions, just note them down. We're about to enter into the discussion session. And now I'll invite Kuria Karanja. He's a member of the Strathmore Energy Research Centre, and he is an e-mobility activist, so that he can give us his address. Then I'll ask Gerance Mutual from Greenpeace to just say hi and lead us into the discussions. Welcome, Kuria Karanja.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I would request for the permission to share my screen.
Allowed.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Kuria Karanja. I have been invited to grace you guys today to explain to you about sustainable energy management and how in East Africa we are doing it, particularly in Kenya, and hailing from the institution that I am located at, Strathmore University. I will explain how we do it there. Okay. So first of all, you need to put some focus on climate change, which I've basically listened to all other speeches and understood clearly that we are in a myriad of so many problems. And one thing that I want to point out is that we're also in an energy crisis. So we are looking at mitigating this problem through proper energy management. And among all the industry players and the different sectors that are major contributors towards climate change or take a large portion of the pollution, this is a major topic, how they manage their energy. So what do I mean by energy management? Energy management is the process of controlling and monitoring assets that consume your energy. So you look at minimizing the amount of losses that you get so that you have efficiency in your operations. Okay, so energy management will focus on a broad of things, but these are my 5 key takeaways. So energy efficiency and conservation, making sure that there are no losses and that the energy you produce is the energy you use. Energy management policy and regulation, just to make sure that everybody is playing their part within the markets and the different industries. Resource necessaries to achieve the energy efficiencies. We now broaden our scope and understand the different kind of technologies that can be involved in how, as a country, as Kenyans, are able to manage our energies efficiently. And then the strategies that we come up with to ensure that we always work towards energy efficiency and conservation. All right, and finally, once we set our heads right for where we want to go, we need to build capacity within our people and within our environment. So we are looking at the human resources and the competencies within our markets to ensure energy efficiency and conservation. So I come from the Applied Technology Lab. So we focus majorly on renewable energy, and we offer professional training and laboratory testing in different applications and project development within the renewable energy sector in Kenya. So we service the government, the commercial sector, and the general public. We are within our university, so we also a knowledge and capacity building center, where we have students come from not knowing anything, and we train them to actually people who go out there to build solutions. Okay, so our training there focuses on the compliance areas. For example, if you come in as a business and you want to set up a proper facility and you want to engage the proper energy management measures, we help you with identifying the compliance areas where you have to make sure that the government, you're also on the safer side. Okay, and then we bring you closer to understand the role of facility management. So understanding what are the needs within your facility, probably it's a production plant or it's a farm or whatever it is, and the kind of personnel that you require to manage these energy systems, because this is a technical field. So for example, if you're working with photovoltaic systems, you probably need electricians and such mechanics to work with you there. So we advise you in that. And then we take you through the energy conservation opportunities available. I've heard so much about the different kinds of financing models and how we can apply solutions that are not dependent on donors. So we look at the opportunities available within the industry, and we try and implement low costs in how we come up with our projects, and typically to try and come up with more energy savings. And we do that through continuous improvements of our strategies in energy management. So at the Energy Center, we get vast experienced people from different fields, from international areas, coming to help us understand how we can do it best. And then we also visit different places. So this is a young world federalism movement. So we are spanning from different areas of the world. And that's the basic essence of it, that we are able to benchmark with different regions of the world and understand how we can localize our solutions for our factories. And then we can also export that to other international markets, now becoming a leader. So let me now go deeper into it. What do I mean when I say energy efficiency and conservation? So first of all, when energy efficiency is when we want to use less energy to perform the same task. And if not less energy, we can use that energy to produce the desired result without any kind of losses or with minimal losses. Now, when it comes to energy conservation, is to reduce now the areas where we are becoming wasteful with energy. So especially in our market where we are a developing country, we get that many of our industries might be informal, and how they implement their industrial processes might put them at risk of some energy losses. And also the country itself is growing its grid and its sources of energy. So while we're not using the available energy well, we also waste what's there, and we suffer more even when it comes to climate change, because our region is where we do not have the right resources. So at our institution, how have we looked at this situation differently? So we realize we are handling a capacity of like 5,000 to 6,000 and more students during the day. And we use a lot of energy within our buildings. We do a lot of training. It's a whole university. So we use a lot of energy. And the university stakeholders sat down and decided to use the energy available in a much productive way. We used to buy our energy from the utility company, which in Kenya is Kenya Power. But then the university saw an opportunity in venturing into the photovoltaics area. So they put solar panels all around the schools, in every rooftop, in every building in the school, in the university, there are solar panels. And these systems were built to scale in a professional manner. And the knowledge that was being applied here were the people, the technicians being trained within the university who actually did it. So it was a very good DIY experiment from the whole, like, it was one visionary kind of work, one person leading the whole thing, one vision. So we were able to install a system that can produce 0.6 megawatts of electricity, and we save so much, like 2 million shillings per month. And when you compound that, we get like 6.5 million on energy savings yearly, which is a very good number and has been growing. This is when it was at the beginning. The cost savings have been reducing and have been growing. So right now the number is different. I won't give you the exact figures, but we are at a much better position. In fact, the university was one of the first to become a carbon neutral kind of university. So that was really commendable from an institution in East Africa, in Africa, trying to lead the way in building our own solutions that are not dependent on any kind of donors. Now, going outside and looking at the whole country, how are we doing our energy management? So we have very good energy management policy and regulations. I want you to know that in Kenya, more than 80% of energy comes from renewable energies. So how we approach energy in our country is really, really commendable, and we are front runner trying to lead other countries. So we have an energy management regulation paper, which was published in 2012. Now, this gives us the policies and regulations that industry players and commercial institutions have to follow. So the first one is, when you're running an institution, you have to have an energy rating. You have to know how much are you consuming. So based on the energy rating, there are tax backings. So you will have to pay some certain amounts. And then we have the energy management policies, which are documented in a huge document. You even have to engage lawyers and the right kind of people just to understand where you should comply. And then there are mandatory energy audits, which happen after every 3 years, where you are required to do an audit of how you've been consuming your energy, and you give that report to the energy regulator. And then they can now incorporate that in their strategies going forward. And they also take action to make sure that you as a company are growing in a much sustainable way, because they're now looking at the whole industry, is now growing a whole nation and its industrialization. And then we also look at the different energy conservation measures that the country has put. We have broad spans in renewable energies, from geothermal to hydroelectric to wind and now solar. So we are looking at all these things, all these measures that are being taken to make sure that the country is a step ahead. We always have an annual energy management report from the national board to explain how the country has been doing, and even the industries have to submit such reports so that they can become, finally, just to make sure that we get licensed energy auditors, and then you also apply to become an energy audit firm. So we actually make sure that these companies in our country, in our region, comply with our energy management policy. Okay, so then we move next to what kind of resources do we require to make sure that we implement all these great ideas that we have. So basically, we just start from the foundation, which is the values, which is the behaviors. And we have standards for ourselves. We put for ourselves energy efficiency standards. So, and how we use the resources available, whether it be companies or consumers, like the person who is in a village somewhere using one bulb. So what are the standards that have been put to that, and how they purchase energy, and make sure that they use efficient appliances that account for less losses in energy. And then we always make sure that any system that comes into our country has the right kind of certification, and they're able to, like, give education to the consumer and make them aware. So we make sure that any kind of these appliances have the right labels to explain how much energy is being used by this appliance and how much is being lost or how much is being gained in whichever way. And finally, then we have the financial incentives. This is just to encourage the different energy technologies. Like in Kenya, as we are encouraging electric vehicles, we're putting financial incentives to make sure that it becomes very cheap to acquire an electric vehicle and to maintain one. And then we make it very expensive to own an ICE or a diesel-powered kind of vehicle. Then through that, we're able to gain more revenue from the polluters, and then we can finance more the people who are bringing in the solutions. And this kind of thinking is translated all across the board in different fields, even in agriculture, in all these different kind of areas. And then we're looking at the different areas where we're reducing our energy use within the building designs in modern cities, especially in Nairobi, where it's a thriving hub, which is coming up as an economic center for the whole region in East and Central Africa. But then we also have more crops of cities and towns across the nation, which are also now bringing more load onto our national grid or to the different energy sources that are available there. So we need to broaden our scope on how we understand how we're going to feed these new areas, these new industries, these new industrial towns that are coming up and their energy needs, how we feed into them, and how they also design their infrastructure to make sure that they're energy efficient. And then finally, we look at our transport sector, which is a major polluter, which is a global problem that we're experiencing. And in fact, I love the whole thing, and I love the way Kennedy introduced me by saying that I'm an enthusiast of electric vehicles. Why? Because even in Kenya, we're looking at decarbonizing our transport system. So moving away from the gasoline and moving into hybrid electric cars. So such are the resources that we will require to achieve more energy efficiency and conservation. All right, so let's look at some of the strategies that have been implemented in the country. The first one is the Kenya National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Strategy. It was done by the Ministry of Energy to give a roadmap for everybody to achieve the energy efficiency goals. And then we had the National Action Agenda, which was to mobilize the different stakeholders towards ensuring there's adequate energy access. And then we have the Kenya National Electrification Strategy, which looks now to the next step to take the line to these people where they might require adequate, quality, reliable, affordable energy to support their high economic growth, so the different towns and areas. And then we had the least cost power development plan, which had to make us rethink how we prioritize our long-term plan. So we made sure that our long-term plan prioritized renewable energies, and that's why we had the basis of least cost power development. Okay, then we have the Kenya National Action Plan, which is an intervention to make sure that the communities, we have many indigenous communities, move from fossil-based kind of fuels and like things like charcoal to clean cooking technologies. And then we had the Kenya Minimum Energy Performance Standards, which now again is a basis of where we get the quality that we have, which is a mandatory level of energy efficiency that every individual has to account for. And this is a KEB standard, which is a Kenya Bureau of Standard has established this to cut across all markets. All right. And then we had Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project, which is, I would like to appreciate my institution, which is part of it, which is a project to provide clean cooking technology and heating solutions to the remote regions and lower density areas. For example, our country is semi-arid, arid and semi-arid. A vast majority of our country is in that region. And in those places, people don't live there because it's really hot, it's a desert, and there's not much economic activity apart from pastoralism. So taking clean energy to those people and introducing clean cooking technology to them is what this COSA project is about. And then we have the Energy Act of 2019, which established EPRA. EPRA is a regulatory authority Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority of Kenya, which now was established to make sure that the different energy sectors are well regulated and they work according to the different goals we've set for energy efficiency and energy management. And then lastly, we have the Energy Management Regulations of 2012, which mandates every kind of facility that consumes more than 180,000 kilowatts of energy to go through the energy ratings and the different policies that I'm just from explaining to you under the energy management regulation policies, okay? And then, so lastly, I want to give you one last thing that you might want to go home with and introduce the people that you meet, that we are trying to do capacity building for energy management at the individual level, so that even if you live in a small house and you only have small appliances that don't use much, you can still implement proper energy management so that you can enjoy the energy costs savings. And then we can expand that to an organizational level where we have the different institutions and companies that are working towards industrializing the developing countries to work under a sustained measure to make sure that the staff that they're working with and anything that they're doing falls under the competencies that are required to achieve the energy efficiencies. And then we look at a nationwide agenda to equip all the kind of leaders in different positions about the skills required in energy management and the knowledge to develop data-driven energy plans for the country. Okay, so yeah, and anybody who wants to engage us more can go to our website and see the energy management training offered at the Strathmore Energy Research Centre. There is true evidence that we need to build more capacity and understand how we can train more people to manage their energy needs well. And so they'll go through our system, which I'm from explaining to you, and we show them how we did it, and so that they can be able to do it again in other areas. And we even have incorporated e-learning, so we can access different people from all the regions in the world who can come and enjoy our training. All right, thank you very much for listening to me and giving me the opportunity. I hope to hear more from different speeches.
Wow, that's it's a nice way to wrap this session. So we've come to the end of the speeches. Thank you so much, Kuria, for that presentation. I would like to open the session for an open discussion. If you have any question, kindly raise your hand. I'll point you out, or you can type the question in the chat box to referring to the person that you want to address that question. And as you do that, I would like to invite Gerance Mutual. He has engaged with Greenpeace, which is an international NGO that deals with environmental and ecosystem conservation. And he's now youth lead at Planet One. Gerance Mutual, kindly unmute, say hi to us as we receive the questions.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Gerance Mutual. I'm an environmentalist by profession, and I head a team of youths running the project Planet One, which is a collaboration between Greenpeace Africa and Frihuset, which is a Swedish youth organization. We are running this project in 6 countries, and our main aim is to build capacity and confidence of young people to participate in environmental activities. And yeah, I think we are trying our very best to put the mandate on the Action for Climate Empowerment, which is basically empowering all members of the society. These are children, youths, to engage in climate action. So far, we've engaged 5,000 youths for the past 1 year in informal settlement of Kenya. That is the Nairobi North area. Call them the slums of Kenya. And yeah, so far we have a movement that is coming up to save one of the rivers, tributaries of Nairobi River called Mathare River. And so far so good. They have propagated almost 1,000 bamboos, which they're going to plant along the 25-kilometer stretch this year. And yeah, we are trying also our very best to teach them on waste management and yeah, to just build their confidence to speak about all these things. I think most of us have focused more on empowered youths. These are people who are learned, university students, college students, and it's not a problem, but we've forgotten the majority of the youths who are from informal settlements. I don't want to say that they are not learned, but they lack the capacity to be taught. So that's our work right now. And I think that's all I can say for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Gerard. And you have a question from John Vlasto.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Terence. Yeah, so you're with Greenpeace. I find this very interesting. So I am extremely frustrated with environmental activists around the world, like Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, WWF, Nature Conservancy. I'm frustrated because they're not calling for a reform of global governance. So, for example, let's take Extinction Rebellion in the UK. They want the UK to be carbon neutral by 2025, I think. And I can tell you for a fact that's not going to happen. And maybe it's just an ambitious thing to make noise, but it's just, it's not real. And I said to them, why don't you call for reform of global governance? Because that's what we actually need to fix the environment. And they just say, well, that's not, the sort of thing we do. And that's madness to me. To me, what we desperately need is climate activists all around the world, Fridays for Future, Greenpeace, Extinction Rebellion, clamoring for reform of global governance outside UN meetings, G20, whatever, because that is how we're going to save the planet. So I'm really interested, Jarens, to hear what you have to say about that.
Thank you, John. I don't want to speak on behalf of Greenpeace for now, but all I can say, some of the projects that they are running right now, I think they have learned from their mistakes, and it's now coming down to Africa, where we had to raise our voices to make sure that they understand that tackling people like Shell, Total, and all those people. Yeah, we need to make sure like we have a shortcut to all this, but there's a long-term way of tackling something, which is now empowering the youths from the ground up, making sure that these youths have the knowledge, have the skills that can help them to take care of the policies and take care of or to keep our governance people accountable. And this becomes a think of power issue, because I feel like our political schemes are usually fraud. And I think this one is generally in every country. You might say like maybe you're superpower and maybe you are less. But when it comes to governance, I believe we are all in a shitty continent. And the only way of fighting this is by empowering the youths, empowering the young people to make the right decision, to create that wave of knowing that we need to make sure that we need to change the system and the status quo. And that's the one of the reason why Planet One is here today. Over.
I'll invite Guido Montani to unmute and ask the question.
Yes. I like to say something about the problem of global finance and that is a crucial problem which is connected with global governance. When people talk about finance, global finance, I think they should take into consideration a reform of the International Monetary Fund. Because if you if you don't have a money, you don't have finance. You have no possibility to make investment. Now, the only international money is the dollar. But there is a reform. There is a reform which is very important for every people, which is based on special drawing rights. You know that the special drawing rights are a basket of money, including the dollar, of course, the euro, the sterling, the yuan, the yen, of course, the China money, the yuan. When you talk about the need for international reform of the finance, you should start from thinking to the reform of the International Monetary Fund, which was the experience of the European Union. Now, the European Union has a certain amount of money at the European level because you have a central bank, a European central bank. In the world, you don't have a European central bank. The European Monetary Fund can become the central bank for the world economy.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite anyone from the audience to ask a question. Let me. Yeah, Gerance Mutual.
Thank you. Guido Montani, I have a question for you. There's a new, I don't know if it's new per se, thing by International Monetary Fund. It's called Debt for Nature, where like IMF gives fund to most vulnerable, like climate vulnerable countries to put into investment. Like in Kenya, there was a new investment for construction of dam. And basically, I don't know if you know this concept, but basically it kind of helps countries which are budget burdened to get money to put into investment at a lower cost. So, but for us, we see like it's kind of a trap where now at the end of it all, they'll start saying that we invested in this and we want to take this over. So maybe you can advise if you heard about the same concept. It's called the debt for nature. Over.
I believe the question is directed to Guido Montani.
You know, if I can say something very short, in a short time, you have today a big problem from in-debt countries, especially African countries, because they are obliged to pay very high interest rate in the international market. For instance, 4% until 8% in order to have to issue a debt. The problem is that rich country having a central bank can issue debt at 1-2%, no more. That I think it is an unjust system of international finance, and we should try to change the international governance of the money, of the international money.
Domenico.
Okay, thank you, Kennedy. Yeah, just a very short question for the organizer of this event. It is not possible to organize a debate, a discussion on these issues with Fridays for Future, in order to see if there is a point on which it's possible to organize a joint initiative on the issue of sustainable development, on the issue of climate change and so on. Thank you.
Okay, so if I got your question right, you're asking if it's possible to organize subsequent events. Did I get your question right? Hello, Domenico. I'm asking for clarification on the question.
No, my question is very simple. Why are we able to organize a discussion on these issues with the organization Fridays for Future, in order to see if it is possible to organize a joint initiative on the issue of environmental protection, energy issues, and so on?
Oh, thank you so much.
Another debate with Friday for Future. Another debate with because Friday for Future is a world organization. Then I think that could be a very useful interlocutors on these issues.
Kennedy, can I jump in?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I really like.
Thank you so much for that.
I really like Domenico's idea. And I mean, Jaren said, I'd like to come back to you just to confirm my understanding. But I mean, this is a meeting organized by World Federalists. So what we're fundamentally about is making global governance that works. And I believe many of us on this call are absolutely convinced that the way to save the planet and to run the environment in the common interest of humanity is to reform global governance, so it's actually functional and accountable. And it's an enormous frustration to me that it is difficult to have this conversation with Greenpeace, Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, and so on. And I really like Domenico's idea of calling a meeting with environment activists and World Federalists to have that discussion as to why it is they're not pushing what we're so convinced is the solution to their problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlasto, for that comment. And just to add to that, we, as a civil society, are eager to reach out to any other organization that will help us achieve our aims. And organizing this event, we reached out to as many organizations as we had in our network, but we are eager and we're welcome to add more participants to these kinds of events. I will reach out to you. I have your contact. I'll reach out to you so that you can connect me to Fridays for the Future. And for sure, we're going to organize a debate between federalists and climate activists so that you can raise these kinds of questions and ask them why they're not doing enough to put our policies into action. So thank you so much for that. Next question will come from Nicole Moki. Kindly unmute and address the question to whomever you want to answer the question.
Thank you so much, Kennedy, and everyone else who was given the presentation today. Mine won't be more of a question, but just more of a call to action, because at the end of the day, we can have tons and tons and tons of conversations and tons of discussions on what we can do as individuals or as a federation when it comes to climate action. But I think what I think we should do as individuals first is to see how are you contributing, you personally, maybe me as Nicole, or each and everyone that is present, the 14 of us who are present here today. So how are you contributing to ensuring that we are keeping the climate sustainable? Are you planting trees on a personal level? Are you adapting the green energy? Are you adapting are we running away from fossil fuels? So mine would be more of a call to action, and just like to urge everyone to, in as much as we want to tackle the bigger picture, which is the governance part of it, I think change starts within us. So we need to, as individuals, make sure you are doing your part to ensure that you are ensuring that the climate is remaining sustainable. Then now when we go to deal with the bigger issues, we can be able to present ourselves as people who, this is what we've done, and we know that if each and everyone adapts this and this and that, then come COP-28 conference this year, things, it won't be more of discussions, but it will be more of, we're going to see progress. We're going to see most of those countries like Russia and all those countries that emit most of the carbon. We want to see them having reduced their carbon emissions and all those things. So that will be it from me, and also to appreciate everyone who's taken the time to for all those nice presentations that you've had today.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And I can see a few more hands raised from Guido and Vlasto.
Yes, I think that the proposal from Domenico Moro is important. I have some contact with people coming from belonging to Fridays for Future in Italy, and not only in Italy. And their strategy is that the government should learn from the scientists and to hear what the scientists says. That is good, but it is not enough, because you have to propose something to change something which is not working. Today, you have a number of COP. We have 27 done, 27 COP, but the result is always the same. Government are hearing the demand of the people, and after they come back and do not do nothing. They do nothing. They don't accept that there is an international change of the method. They have the possibility not to do. So the idea that we have what John Vlasto said, we have to change the method of organization of the United Nations Conference. We should have a real global governance. Otherwise, you have only people for protest. For instance, the last generation people make something again, protesting in the street. But if you do not have a political proposal, the protest is itself change in violence, only violence. So we should say that it is inevitable to have a new system of governance in the United Nations.
Yeah, Now, I agree with Guido absolutely completely. We're at 27 climate COPs. We're at 15 biodiversity COPs. Why are these COPs separate anyway? It's all the environment. They're totally interrelated. It's obviously insane that we make decisions with 193 sovereign nations negotiating in their sovereign interests. We need some sort of parliamentary global governance structure that works. Now, Nicole, I totally agree that people need to take action, but I could not disagree more strongly with you that the action they need to take is worrying about their own footprint, because that is not going to save the planet. And we don't solve murder by asking people not to murder each other and hoping for the best. We do it by having laws and putting people in jail if they transcend those laws. The way to solve issues of the commons, tragedy of the commons, is governance. It isn't asking people to be nice. It doesn't work. We've been doing it for years. It isn't working. So what we need to ask climate activists to do is engage with the political system, get their domestic politicians to have a policy of making global governance better. That is how we're going to save the planet. And absolutely. And I have no problem with people behaving nicely to themselves, but I've got a whole bunch of friends who aren't going to do it. Lots of people aren't going to do it. It isn't going to work by trying to be nice. We have to get global laws in place that are enforced.
Thank you so much. We are about to wrap up, and I have a few questions for Guido and John Vlasto. The first one is, I would have addressed this to Juuso, but he has left the meeting. So I will forward the question to you. He mentioned something about international climate change treaties being very vague because of the veto power. In your model, in a federalist world, how can we circumnavigate this kind of condition? That's the first question. The second question, I'll refer to Guido Montani regarding the IMF reforms, the need to have IMF reforms, and the fact that it's cheaper to borrow if you're a developed country compared to if you're a developing country. How can we bring about these reforms? And my question for Vlasto is regarding the mega project. You've mentioned that you need volunteers. What kind of support do you need? Are you asking from us? How can we contribute to this project? And also, what phase of the project have you reached, and what are the next actions that you plan to take for the project?
Okay, shall I go first, Guido? All right. So, I mean, on your first question about what do we do about the fact that what comes out of COPs is very weak because every country has a veto. I mean, that's exactly the same point. That's the core point I've been trying to make throughout my presentation today. 193 sovereign nations negotiating lowest common denominator compromises doesn't produce decisions that are in the common interest of humanity. We need to move to majority decision-making. We need to move to enforcement powers. That requires accountability. We need some parliamentary body. We need to reform global governance. The current method isn't producing decisions that serve the common interest of humanity. As regards the mega project for now, if you're representing a civil society organization and you want to get involved, please email me. I've dropped my email in the chat, or Kennedy's got my email, and I'll follow up on that. One of the things we need to do is build a website so people can sign up on the website. We're not there yet. But if you email me and you have capacity and you want to join the discussions we're having, you can do that. If you simply want to be seen to support, drop me an email and we'll get that in place. What's coming next on that project, as I think I mentioned earlier on, is we're having a presentation from the person that's writing the report, Maya Groff, on the feedback from her commissioners on the zero draft of her final report. And that has details in it of financing initiatives, policy initiatives, institutional initiatives, long-term, short-term. All in this report will be out before COP28 later on this year. So with that said, thank you very much, Kennedy, for organizing. And Guido, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, No, concerning the reform of the International Monetary Fund, I think that we should deal with this kind of problem in a new meeting. I only say that it is urgent to have a discussion on this problem, because now the dollar, which is the main money utilized in international relations for payments, is in crisis, and you see that the utilization of the dollar is in crisis because Trump started to utilize the dollar as a money weapons in order to make sanctions. So today there is a reaction among BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and yes, BRICS, the BRIC country. They try to have an alternative money. They start to create an alternative money like the euro existing today. If you have many money in a war of money, in the international situation, that is a destabilizing, a very dangerous situation. So I think that the problem is urgent and that the federalists can make important proposals, but I don't enter into the detail because it is not possible. I like only to add a short information about an intervention of a young people from Bangladesh who published a paper before the Sharm el-Sheikh COP, saying that in Bangladesh, young people organize with the approval of the government a parliament, a Bangladesh parliament of young people, in order to give advice concerning the reform for energy, environment, and so on. I put here the idea that we should think about a world parliament of young people, because in such a way we can ask to Friday for Future, the Last Generation, and so on, to enter into this kind of parliament and to make democratic proposal for the changing of the government, the governance of the United Nations. I think that the United Nations should learn something from the next generation. The next generation is here among us because teenagers are the next generation.
Wow, there's no that's the perfect way to end this meeting, and that's something that we did not mention during our discussion about youths and future generations. And thank you so much, Guido, for mentioning that as we close this meeting. I would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants for joining us and participating. We have recorded this session. I will advise on what platform we're going to publish this recording for posterity and for people who are not able to attend this session. I will try my best to reach out to everyone with the contact details of Vlasto, Montani, Juuso, Gerans, and all the other speakers. And as I've mentioned before, this is just the beginning. We are going to organize a subsequent event, and we hope that you will join us for these future discussions. I hope that at this point you've been inspired, you've learned something, and that you're going to take action as Nicole has called us to do. So at this juncture, I would like to thank you all for attending and participating. and to wish you a blessed rest of your day. You may leave the meeting at your will.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.
Bye-bye.